What kind of mother lets a dog like that near her baby? The neighbor's voice cracked through the humid morning air like a whip. Marlene stopped in her tracks, one hand still on the rusted gate, the other clutching her baby's bottle. The woman Pam Caldwell stood on her porch in a faded robe, shaking her head as if she had witnessed a crime. Marlene didn't respond. She'd long learned that silence was stronger than explaining herself to people who only saw what they wanted. She turned back toward the backyard, where the low cries of a baby mixed with the harsh scraping sound of metal against fur and bone. The gate had slammed shut that morning when the storm rolled in early. Wind snapped branches, flung toys across. The yard slammed at the back gate closed just as Buck, a 6-year-old German shepherd with soft amber eyes, had poked his head through to watch the commotion beyond. The heavy iron frame, warped with age and rust, caught him behind the ears and locked him in place. Now, his large body trembled with panic. His breath came in short, guttural pants. Blood was already beginning to show on his neck where he'd tried to pull free. But what chilled Marlene wasn't the sight of the dog, it was what lay beside him. Her 9-month-old daughter, Ellie, sat just inches away from Buck's massive paws. She had crawled outside before Marlene could close the door, and now, as wind howled and branches creaked above, she was within reach of a terrified, trapped animal. Any sudden movement could be catastrophic. But Ellie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She crawled up to Buck and gently placed her tiny hand on his trembling nose, and Buck, bloody stuck, panting with fear still bore. Marlene didn't dare move. She crouched low, inching toward them through the wet grass, whispering reassurances not just to the dog, but to her daughter. Ellie, dressed in a pink onesie that was already smeared with mud, turned and smiled, her hand still on Buck's fur. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Just a year ago, Marlene had lived in a cozy apartment in Knoxville, a schoolteacher with a quiet routine and a husband who brought her coffee in bed. Then came the accident, the fire, the funeral that blurred into paperwork. Ellie was only a week old when her father died, saving another family from a burning barn. Marlene never even got to say goodbye. She moved to Cedar Hill for peace. What she found was a crumbling farmhouse and 100 memories she never asked. For she hadn't planned on keeping Buck either. He'd belonged to Jacob, her husband. Buck had been his partner during training exercises and night shifts as a search and rescue officer. After Jacob's death, Buck refused to eat for a week. At the funeral, he lay next to the coffin and didn't move. Everyone expected he would have to be put down. But then, one night, Marlene woke to Ellie crying in her crib and found Buck standing beside it, gently rocking the base with his nose. From that moment on, he refused to leave the baby's side. That loyalty, that love, was why Marlene hadn't called animal control when she saw him stuck in the gate, because she knew deep in her aching chest that Buck wouldn't hurt her baby. He'd died before he let anything happen to her. Now, crouching just feet away, Marlene could see the cuts behind his ears deepening. His eyes darted, searching for a way out. He tried once more to pull back, yelped in pain, and Ellie, in response, leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his dot. It was a moment too pure for words. Marlene scrambled for the toolbox on the porch and came back with a crowbar and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She worked at the rusted hinges, her breath catching with each metallic groan. Rain began to fall harder, and still Ellie sat with Buck, her little body shielding his from the cold. When the gate finally gave, Buck fell backward, dazed but breathing. Blood streaked the fur around his neck. Marlene pulled Ellie into her arms and looked down at the dog. For a long second he just stared back, then rested his head against her knee, as if to say, "I'm sorry." But she wasn't angry, because in a world that had taken her husband, broken her peace, and tried to leave her hollow, this dog had protected what mattered most. Not with teeth, but with loyalty. Not with bark, but with presence, and her daughter had returned that love the only way a baby could, through touch, through trust, through something purer than most adults remembered how to give. What the town saw as danger was actually salvation. The rain had settled into a soft rhythmic patter by the time Marlene brought Buck inside. Ellie was bundled in a towel, her cheeks red and warm against her mother's chest, while Buck limped behind them, dragging one paw slightly and still dripping rainwater onto the floorboards. The old farmhouse creaked as the storm passed. The silence inside broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock and the quiet cooing of the baby. Marlene laid Ellie down gently on a blanket in the living room, but Buck refused to rest. He paced slowly, stiffly, his eyes never leaving the baby. Marlene tried to coax him to lie down, even tried placing a soft cushion by the fireplace, but Buck ignored it. Instead, he lay beside Ellie and lowered his head onto her tiny legs. It was as if he needed to feel her heartbeat to believe everything was okay. And for a long moment, with the fire crackling and the scent of rain drifting through the open window, everything did feel okay until the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her gut tightened. When she picked up, the voice on the other end was clipped, almost rehearsed. "Miss Haywood, this is Officer Reddick with Cedar Hill Animal Control. We've received a report of an aggressive German Shepherd causing danger to a child on your property. Are you currently safe?" Marlene blinked, her eyes darting to Bucky's body curved protectively around her baby. "Safe? Yes, of course we're safe." Buck isn't a danger. He saved her. I understand your concern, the officer said, not unkindly. But we're required to investigate any claims involving animals and children, a neighbor reported. Screaming, possible injury, and a baby unsupervised near a distressed animal. We'll be there within the hour. She hung up without saying goodbye. Her hands trembled, not from fear of Buck but from fear of what the world would do to him, because she'd seen it before, how people assumed, how rumors turned to judgments. Buck was a German shepherd, strong, fast, imposing. That alone made him a target. He had scars from the fire that took Jacob. He had tremors in his back legs, but none of that mattered to them. All they would see was a dog near a baby in distress, and no one would care that he hadn't barked, hadn't bitten, hadn't done anything but love. Marlene knelt beside him, brushing the fur back from the bleeding wound on his neck. They're coming, she whispered, and I don't know how to stop them. Buck didn't flinch. He only nudged Ellie's foot gently with his nose, as if reminding her that he was still there. Ellie reached for his ears, pulling softly, giggling. That innocent, effortless trust broke something in Marlene. She grabbed her coat, wrapped Ellie in a dry blanket, and opened the door. Buck hesitated, glancing back at the warm hearth, but when she called his name again, he followed. The sun had begun to break through the clouds as they walked across the wet yard. Marlene didn't know where she was going, only that she had to go. She didn't want Buck to be locked in a cold kennel, judged by people who'd never watched a dog sit by a crib every night without fail, who didn't know what it meant to lose everything and have only one soul remain loyal. They made it to the old barn Jacob used to work in, tucked at the edge of the field. Inside, it smelled of dust and hay and thyme. Marlene laid Ellie on a bale of straw, wrapped tight in her blanket. Buck lay beside her without command. His eyes were tired, but alert, always alert. Marlene sat on the wooden floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She watched them, dog and baby breathing in tandem. That was when she heard the truck, tires on gravel, doors slamming. They had found them. Voices called out in the distance, but Marlene didn't answer. She just pressed her forehead to her knees and prayed not for herself, but for Buck, that anyone would look past his breed, his size, his scars, that they'd see what her daughter already knew with no words at all. He was family. Footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then firm. Officer Reddick's voice echoed through the barn. Ms. Haywood, we're here to make sure everything's okay. Marlene stood slowly, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't speak, just pointed toward the straw, where Buck was curled around Ellie like a soldier around a fallen comrade. The officers paused, no barking, no growling, just a wounded dog and a baby girl resting her hand on his neck, as if he were a stuffed toy. Officer Reddick lowered his voice. Is that blood? Yes, Marlene said quietly. His, not hers. The silence that followed was longer than she expected, and then, from behind the uniformed men, a new voice, a woman in plain clothes, stepped forward. My name's Dr. Evelyn Moore. I work with behavioral evaluations for rescued animals. May I come closer? Marlene nodded. Dr. Moore approached, with calm steps, and knelt beside the pair. She observed for a few moments, said nothing, then she reached out, slowly. Buck opened one eye but didn't move. She touched his side gently and nodded. This dog isn't dangerous, she said. He's in pain. He's exhausted, but he's not a threat. If anything, he's the reason that baby is calm right now. Marlene burst into tears. For the first time since Jacob died, she felt seen, not judged, not doubted. Seen. The officers didn't take Buck away that day. Instead, they helped Marlene get him to a vet, who stitched the wounds and praised his strength. Local news caught wind of the story, and soon, Buck wasn't a warning, he was a hero. The dog who stayed still for a baby. The dog who let a child's tiny hands soothe what even time couldn't heal. And in the end, as the seasons changed and the baby grew, Buck remained by her side, watching, guarding, loving, because some stories don't need words, just loyalty, and the quiet, fearless heart of a dog who refused to leave. Marlene didn't sleep that night. The image of Ellie standing beside Buck with her hand on his muzzle replayed endlessly in her mind. The baby hadn't cried. She hadn't panicked. Instead, she had waddled forward and whispered in her own baby babble, placing her tiny hand right on Buck's fur, as if she'd known that his pain needed soft comfort more than noise or alarm. That moment had felt like a miracle, but the world outside didn't understand miracles the same way. The next morning, the knock on her door came just after sunrise. It was too firm, too purposeful. Maleno opened it to find Officer Reddick, again, this time flanked by a younger woman in a gray blazer holding a clipboard. Behind them, parked on the gravel, was a white van with the county seal and the words Animal Welfare Division printed on the side. I thought we were done with this, Marlene said, tightening her grip on the doorframe. We just need to conduct a final observation, the woman said. There's been a formal report filed. We're required to act. Marlene hesitated. She knew what that meant. One more misinterpreted gesture, one more flicker of our knees, and they would take Buck, probably for good. Buck lay curled in the living room beside Ellie, who was still in her pajamas, humming quietly and brushing her fingers through his fur. The sight was so gentle, so heartbreakingly pure, that Marlene almost cried again. But she had to be strong now. But she said, "But you're not touching him unless I say so." Inside, the officer and the welfare agent moved slowly, speaking in low tones, taking notes. Buck watched but didn't move, only shifted his ears when Ellie laughed at one of her toys. At one point, the woman leaned down, making eye contact with Marlene. "He's clearly bonded with the child," she said softly. "But if there's any aggression, he hasn't shown one sign." Marlene snapped. "He got hurt trying to protect her. You should be giving him a medal." The woman didn't argue, but she wrote something down. As they left, she paused. "In the doorway, there's going to be a hearing," she said. "It's standard procedure when a report involves a minor and a large breed. I just wanted to prepare you." After they left, Marlene closed the door and slumped to the floor. A hearing. Bureaucracy. Paperwork. People in suits making decisions based on checklists, not memories or instincts, or the way a baby had chosen a dog over any human in the room. That night, as if sensing Marlene's despair, Buck placed his head in her lap. She ran her fingers over the scar above his eye, one he'd gotten in the fire that took Jacob. It was the first time Buck had cried. Just once, low and guttural, as if even he wasn't sure if he was allowed. The day of the hearing came with gray skies and the smell of approaching rain. Marlene carried Ellie into the county building, her heels echoing down the tiled hallway like a countdown. In her other hand was Buck's leash, though he didn't need it. He walked beside her without resistance, tail low, eyes scanning the unfamiliar world. The hearing room was small, a table, 2 officials, a veterinarian, a stack of papers, and an air of quiet judgment. They asked questions. How had Buck gotten stuck? Why was the baby alone? Had Buck shown signs of distress, of aggression, of territorial behavior? Marlene answered carefully but firmly. "My daughter is alive because of this dog. She wasn't afraid of him, not even once. You can't teach a child to fake that." The vet confirmed Buck's injuries were self-inflicted in panic, not aggression. The welfare rep admitted there were no bite marks, no snapped jaws, no signs of trauma on the baby. Only a dog who had been stuck, and a baby who had tried somehow to help. But still, it didn't feel like enough then. As if summoned by fate, Ellie began to fuss in Marlene's arms. She wriggled free and toddled straight toward Buck, who sat obediently at her feet. With the entire room watching, she bent down and placed her forehead against his nose. Buck closed his eyes. No one breathed. The veterinarian leaned forward and said gently, "I've worked with animals for 20 years. You can't stage that." And that was the moment it changed. The room softened. The notes stopped. The judge leaned back and folded her hands. "Pending a 6-month evaluation, the dog may remain in the home under continued supervision. No restrictions as long as his behavior remains stable." Marlene exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Her arms went around Buck's neck as Ellie clapped beside them, unaware of the weight that had just been lifted. They walked out into the parking lot as the first drops of rain began to fall again, but it didn't feel heavy this time. It felt like cleansing, like grace. Because Buck wasn't just a dog who had gotten stuck. He was the last living link to a man who had died saving his family. He was the silent guardian of a baby who had trusted him completely, and he was finally seen for who he truly was, not a threat, but a hero with scars. A protector with a heart. A friend no child would ever forget. And from that day forward, every time Ellie reached for Buck, she did it the same way, with trust, with love, and with a memory etched into her soul, deeper than words. Some stories don't need explaining. Some stories just need to be felt. The storm that had hovered in Marlene's life for weeks didn't let up after the hearing, though Buck was allowed to stay. The arrangement came with conditions, mandatory behavioral assessments, surprise welfare visits, and the looming threat of permanent removal if anything went wrong. Marlene tried to stay hopeful for Ellie's sake, but each day felt like walking a tightrope with no net beneath her. Every bark, every startled twitch, felt like it would be recorded, judged, and possibly twisted. But Buck changed. The big German shepherd who had once slept restlessly by the door now curled protectively beside Ellie's crib at night, his head resting near her pillow like he was still making sure she was breathing. Marlene would often find him awake at odd hours, ears alert, not guarding from danger but from fear. His fear of being taken again, of failing the little girl who had shown him mercy when the world did not. And Ellie, in her toddler innocence, never once seemed to understand that their bond was under scrutiny. To her, Buck was simply hers, her fuzzy giant, her brave shadow. She'd feed him bits of her toast, fall asleep on his belly, and giggle when he followed her through the house like a bodyguard on tiny patrol duty. He was her safest place, and slowly, he became Marlene's again too. But peace is often a fragile illusion. It shatters quietly. It was early spring when the final storm hit, not the kind with thunder or rain, but one that came by mail. An official notice. A petition had been reopened. An anonymous neighbor had submitted images of Buck at the gate the night of the incident, bloodied and stuck. No context, just drama, just fear. The letter explained that there would be one final review. This time, a decision would be made at the state level. If the outcome wasn't favorable, Buck would be removed permanently and deemed unfit for adoption. Marlene stared at the envelope, her fingers trembling. The hearing was scheduled in 10 days. 10 days to relive everything. 10 days to prepare a case to defend a dog who couldn't speak, and a baby who couldn't yet fully explain why she trusted him. That night, as Ellie slept, Marlene sat on the floor beside Buck and wept. Not because she was afraid, but because she was tired. Tired of defending something so clearly good. Tired of living under the microscope while doing everything right. Buck nudged her hand with his snout, soft and slow, as if he understood her pain better than anyone else. The day before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Marlene was in the kitchen when Ellie toddled into the backyard alone. Normally, this would have triggered alarms, but Buck had been let out just moments earlier, and instinctively Marlene knew he'd follow. She watched from the window, heart in her throat. Ellie had wandered toward the old gate, the same one where Buck had once gotten trapped. The metal had since been sanded down, made safe. Still, the place held shadows. Ellie reached out and touched it, her tiny fingers brushing against the lower rung. Then she did something that made Marlene's heart lurch. She sat down right there, in the grass, beside the gate, and she began to cry. But not a baby's cry. Not one of hunger or fear. It was soft, mournful, almost like she was remembering something that no one else could see. Buck rushed to her side instantly. He didn't bark, he didn't whine. He simply lay down beside her, placing his head gently in her lap. Ellie placed both her hands on his ears, leaned down, and whispered something only he could hear. Marlene didn't know what it was, but she saw Buck blink slowly. She saw him breathe, and then press his nose gently to her chest. It was then that Marlene realized this wasn't just comfort. This was memory. Ellie remembered that night. She remembered his fear. She remembered being alone, and she remembered who stayed. That night, Marlene wrote a letter, a real one, handwritten to the board. She didn't cite legal codes. She didn't offer data or testimonials. She simply told the story of a father lost in a fire, of a dog who survived with scars, of a baby who chose trust over fear, and of a family who kept holding on when the world said they shouldn't. She attached one photo. Ellie, sitting at the gate, with Buck's head in her lap. The final hearing arrived quietly. There were no reporters, no flashing lights, just a room full of people who had read too many reports, who had forgotten what it felt like to witness a bond that didn't need words. But Marlene spoke clearly. This time not with trembling or panic, but with something unshakable. Buck didn't just protect my daughter once, she said. He does it every day, with his silence, with his watchfulness, with his loyalty. And my daughter, she speaks to him in a language none of us can hear, but they understand each other. And I won't let you break that. The room stayed still, and then came the verdict. Buck would stay. The conditions were lifted, the reports closed, the case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, as the wind rolled in from the west, Buck looked up at Marlene, then back at Ellie, who clapped in delight as he barked just once for the first time in weeks. A single sound that felt like a sigh of relief, because some souls, whether covered in fur or born too small to speak, carry memories deeper than time. And some love doesn't need language, it just needs to be believed.